3 o'clock yet. I was not able to go in today. I'm sorry, I'll explain later. I won't make it part of this video, which hopefully I'll use longer than this one time. So we are really, I wanted to not miss this week, so I'm making a video with a PowerPoint I've updated to go over the history of children's literature. We started it last week. I haven't gone through the high flex yet to see what everybody put. And so I will do that. But you'll see some of what we did last week mentioned a little bit later in the presentation. And also a reminder that I want you to make sure you did something as part of your high flex. If you didn't, it's going to need to be done this week. And it's not a long thing, but if you watched the video, then you watched us do it, so you probably should be able to do it. All right, so I am going to share my screen if I can pull up my PowerPoint. Let's see. It's always the wonder of all of it is the tech. So we've been talking about stories and narratives and like how we started to understand literature in our lives as children. And I want to kind of give you a snapshot of the history of literature that gives you a chance to kind of see how it developed. And it is my take. I did use another PowerPoint as a resource because that's a lot of work. All right. So one thing you want to think about is what is the earliest forms of children's literature? And I'm not only talking about what was printed because a lot of this didn't really become a visual piece of literature, right? Until we had our printing press, or I guess the monks were writing stuff, but maybe not, certainly not for children. So creation stories are like a major resource for understanding cultures, or understanding how cultures have different ways of looking at creation. Judeo-Christianity, which is probably the most prevalent in America, is the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, the flood, Noah's Ark, the stories of Abraham and Moses. I don't even know what Abraham is, but don't tell my daughter. Moses, I believe, is part in the seas, so I'm still not quite up to date on all of my biblical background. Now, Greece and Rome is really going back all the way to Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey. These are parts of our literature in the public schools, but I don't really remember much about Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey. I know my dad gave me a version of it. I'm sure I've read parts of it. Aesop's Fables, though, I do know we talked a little bit about it. We'll be looking at those next week. Of course, I have worked hard to get all of my literature that I have, my collection to campus. So I don't have those here to share. So we will be doing a lot of this like specific work with fables and folk tales and legends and things next week in the classroom. So you can take note of that. If you want to be able to easily do the assignments we'll be working on, you might want to have some like selected to have to do. We're going to be comparing some and we'll be writing some annotated bibliographies. Ovid's Greek and Roman myths and legends also, those are versions. A lot of times they're the similar stories, but they're retold in different ways by different people. So we have talked about this, that before the printing press, people told stories orally. They always were, there were storytellers. They sat around the fire. They shared stories and poems, and those were enjoyed by adults and children. In the Middle Ages, before the Renaissance, what we can also see through our literature and the history is kind of see it's kind of chicken and the egg, right? But you can see how children are treated in different parts of history based on certain features of our literature. I'm going to see if I can't move this box up. Here we go. So before the Renaissance, And the Renaissance is when we had a rejuvenation of interest in art and literature and everything. Childhood, as we know it, didn't exist, right? Children's activities were no different than those of adults. As soon as they could contribute to the household, they were expected to. And lifespans were very short. So, being a child, like, really could be a much shorter span of time if you're going to die at 15 or something, right? So stories were told around the fires in cottages or sung in the great halls of castles. And this says children went to work at 7. That sounds awful. Some of the stories, I grew up with these stories and I loved them. Robin Hood, King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table. I loved all those stories. I thought that they really sparked my imagination. Of course, I wanted to be a princess, but one of them strong ones like Mulan, who could like beat everybody up and didn't need a man, but still wanted a man. I don't know. It's not perfect, right? So now I'm trying to get this to go to the next one. I'm not sure. Okay. The Renaissance, which is a historical period of time, rekindled interest in the Greek and Roman cultures and art. In 1440, the invention of the printing press, that changed the world of books forever. And one of the first things I want you to do as part of your homework with this video is really look into how the printing press changed literature in the world, and especially for children. And you should look at what's in our textbook. And I did go in order as I created this and put a couple PowerPoints together. So if you go to the section with Renaissance, you can find a small section on it. You could also Google AI, Google printing press, and you put in how did this change literature in the world, how did it change children's literature, and report back on what it says. So when we were talking about the pocket, the Pretty Pocket, which I always call Polly Pocket because my daughter had those Polly Pockets, which were terrible from God knows what country with whatever toxins, right? And they were total choking hazards. Every time I do that section, all I think about are those Polly Pockets and the hundreds of outfits and everything. So we talked about the Hornbook, and this is one of the first things that schools had for children to read from. It's called the Hornbook. I'd also like you to look at the images in our textbook around the Hornbook and see what it says in the text about it, like what kinds of literature or letters or print is found on a Hornbook, okay? And what were they used for? Because to me, when I look at this, it looks like a paddle that someone's gonna get hit with. But anyway, now the Orbis is getting us really close to the Pretty Pocket, right? So this is the Orbis Pictus. I do have one of these in my office, of course. And I want you to take a minute in your notes or two to compare the Hornbook to the Orbis Pictus and the New England Primer, which is coming up on the next slide. How are they different? Like, how do they change too? Because they are getting, as you go along, they do get different, perhaps better, right? So kind of write about how that happens, what happens, and look at where you can read what is there and you can read the images. See what children are going to learn from the illustrations, from the words that they're sharing, or poems, or like literature, if it's from the Bible or something, or the phrasing and stuff. What are they learning? Which is a lot of what we discussed when we were talking about the pocket. The Pretty Pocket, almost a Polly Pocket, but there I did. Oh, and so when I say at the bottom, text chapter 1, pages 5 to 8, I actually am expecting that you're going to turn in a written answer to those questions, and you should use pages 5 to 8, okay? Now, the Pretty Pocket, I did give you a link to a digital one last week, and that's still available this week. Now, I remember many times hearing about tabula rasa, probably in college for education. and it not being necessarily a good thing. You can think about whether you think it's a good thing. So minds of young children are blank slates waiting to be written upon. I guess is it that it's not that it's a bad thing. It's that we have to be really intentional about not just vomiting information to them that we think they should know, that how do we create children that can create critical thinking and thoughts around issues to decide what will be on those slates. Like, why would we be dictating everything? Like, some things we're going to help them work on. We're going to help them work on social skills and how do they treat other people and whatnot. But, you know, think about what sometimes I guess there's somebody who also talks about children can be molded and stuff. And I don't know, I don't want teachers necessarily molding my children. I want them guiding them and helping them, supporting them, and teaching them how to think and solve problems. So here's the Pretty Pocket slide, but remember there is a link in our content to this, and maybe I'll put it up again just so you can find it more easily. So John Newbery is one of the ones who launched the first successful publishing company. He's the one who has the Newbery Award and is so most of us are familiar with Newbery and Caldecott. After this semester, you should know the Belpre Pupra, I can't say it right, but the Latin American Award, and there's another one for, is it Harriet Tubman? Well, we'll go through them, but there's also really a nice one too for diversity and DEISJ, or anti-bias education, which is my preference. So today the Newbery Award is given each year to the best book published. The Caldecott is for the illustrations. So here's a reminder to make sure that you've completed your examination of the Pretty Pocket. If you're just listening to the class and not doing any of the work we're doing during it, then you're not really doing what the HyFlux summaries are meant to do. And I wanted you to then think about, if you already did the examination, that's fine. But I want you to go a step further and think, okay, Locke's philosophy that children are blank slates to be written upon, what do we see them wanting to write upon children from the Pretty Pocket? One of the next things, as well, these things were all probably oral stories that were being told, and they kind of went elevated to another level when we had the printing press, right? So Charles Perrault is known for his collection of Mother Goose tales. That also includes Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella. So it also includes some fairy tales. The Grimm's fairy tales are also very popular, and you can kind of see the dates of these. In 1791, Newbery published the tales from the Arabian Nights, and then Denmark's Hans Christian Andersen. Now, these are all often have similar fairy tales, but there may be different versions based on the cultural lens that they're being written from. And one of the things we'll be doing in our next written assignment, our essay, is to compare folk tales from different cultures and talk about how we see the cultures reflected in them. Like, what are the differences? How do we see it reflected, etc.? What remains the same? This just goes into a little bit more of those. The Grimm brothers, and I always think of, I can't help but be influenced by television. We have the Grimm series and we have the Once Upon a Time, the other series, right? So the Grimm brothers, I think they're thought to have been a darker version, but we'll have to explore that. We have Snow White, Rumpelstiltskin. Fairy tales are associated with children for the first time. Some of the some of the earlier ones, if we read the earliest versions, we might be, this is not appropriate for children, right? Hans Christian Andersen, probably to me, he was one of the first who probably wrote them in a way that's appropriate for children, but I could be wrong. So, Princess and the Pea, I don't know what the Wild Swans is. I'd have to look that up. And again, these are all happening around different times in the world. The Victorian age is an age where children really took on a different role in our society, and there was a very idealized idea of how children should be. And one of the books, some of the books from that time period that were very popular, Alice in Wonderland. And then I don't know why this is like this. I think I want to change the slide already. I did take this wording from something, and it says for boys, adventure stories for boys, and then domestic stories for girls. But I think it's actually, I don't need to change it because during that time, we're still telling stories in gender biased ways, right? In their minds, that's why it was written. It was for boys. Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, which I actually liked, and I wanted the adventure, right? But I was a girl. And then Little Women, I didn't read that till I was a lot older. And Anne of Green Gables, I never read. What about you guys? Did you read those? I don't think I read Treasure Island, but my dad gave it to me. But Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, I loved that running away, the adventure, being independent as a child kind of idea. Then we have the rise of poetry as well. And these are some of these I don't know. We're going to need to look them up. So it looks like St. Nicholas is Clement Moore. We're getting into the fantasy idea of Santa Claus. Saint Nick, Edward Lear's nonsense verse. I do know this one, and but some of these I really don't remember them from childhood. Christina Rossetti, I don't, who has seen the wind. So I think for when we do poetry, we're definitely checking these out. I do know Robert Louis Stevenson. I have this Children's Garden of Verses, but I also have a book that talks about his life. And we'll be checking that out when we do poetry as a genre. What poetry, when I was a child, I always got Shel Silverstein books from my mom. And poetry beyond that, I didn't, unless it was like a song. And I do think song lyrics are poetry. But a lot of poetry, really, unless it was like high school and we were doing poetry, I don't really remember much. And I don't think I was as interested in it as I should have been. What's cool now, and this isn't the right place to put it, but like there's so many beautifully written novels that are poetry, like they're written in poetry verse. Like I'm thinking about Brown Girl Walking. I have a bunch on my shelf. I'll pull them out when it's the right time, so I can check them out. Unfortunately, there's so many books I'd like to read and not enough time for me to do it. It's definitely not an easy thing for me to do when I have a migraine cluster doing. Now, one of the big things we'll be looking at once we get into picture books as a genre will be the illustrations and the art of illustration and how the choices that are made, the intentional choices that are made in illustrations impact the story or move the story forward or don't, right? So children's book illustrations much improved. If we think about the Horn book, which most of those didn't have illustrations. And then very slowly, I think the Orbis is mentioned because there were pictures in it. I think they talked about them being wood carvings before they printed them or whatever. And then but they were like not all in color because it was very complicated to print in color. Um, and it was a very laborious process, right? It probably always is, but getting it ready for what the accepted printing process was limited what they thought they could do at that time. And again, these are the people that are known for illustrations back in between 1800 and 1900, and we'll see a little bit of what they were doing. Again, I don't really remember these. I mean, obviously Randolph Caldecott. I know Caldecott Award is for illustrations, But the only way I know the other two is from working on these PowerPoints, and you probably would want to Google those to get more of an idea. Recognize, so in the 20th century, yeah, literary and artistic quality in children's books, it's just skyrocketed, right? And we have, budgets and amazing libraries and public schools, so their exposure to different literature really expands. The development of the picture storybook as a genre, when you see all that really goes, we take it for granted what a picture book is. It's a book with pictures, but if you actually look at it as a genre, you will come to see that there's a lot of rules and or characteristics that people are very intentionally incorporating as they develop their artistic um, picture book. So, growth in nonfiction books, that I think if you think about those first few things, they were not necessarily like they were fiction, I guess, right? We had Jack and the Beanstalk, maybe we had an ABC where we had the Bible or whatever. This nonfiction, we had information books, books children can learn from. Most recently, probably, is, feelings, how to handle feelings, meditation, etc., and poetry. Illustrating a poem can be a whole book. Now, Beatrix Potter is, I don't know if I read it in this one or if I think I read it in curriculum because Vivian Paley reads it to her class, but she's sometimes called the mother of the picture storybook. And these animals as the main characters, the protagonist and everything, is really a big part of our beginning picture books. So a picture storybook is one in which pictures and text are both equally important. So yes, we have an author, but the illustrator is just as important to the telling of the story. And sometimes they're the same person. We are doing a study in curriculum now of Leo Leone, and he is the illustrator. Beatrix Potter, I didn't think Beatrix Potter was the illustrator, but this makes it look like she is. We're going to make sure we look at that when we examine picture books for sure. And we're going to examine picture books that have no wordless picture books, right? And how do they tell a story? Now, this is the part that has the most work for you to do, and it's the most related to child development and whether you're going to be a teacher or not. And I think everyone that is in the class is involved in education as a career goal. And is we're going to look at how these theories of child development, well, what are the theories of child development? And then how does our textbook see links between the theories and the development of children's literature. So you're going to need your textbook for this. You already have been exposed for sure to Piaget and Erikson in multiple classrooms. And Kohlberg, I know we talked sometimes I talk just a little bit about Kohlberg in Children in the Arts, but this is one of those things where Kohlberg is often talked about. And we will talk about these next week, but part of your homework is to really read those sections, summarize them. So it's kind of like taking notes, but also seeing, well, why is this in this children? Why is this in a textbook for literature for children? What's the importance? We need to infer. So I want you to do some thinking about that and submit it in the HyFlex summary. And I know that I guess I'll have to make a separate assignment because I don't want to make people do a HyFlex summary if I'm not coming to class. So I will just make it a homework assignment connected to this PowerPoint video. And I'm sorry I couldn't be there today. I appreciate your flexibility. Know that I will try to also be supportive when you have things going on with your health or other things. Just make sure you communicate. And thank you very much. I'm trying to end it. There we go.